I stared at the small, crumpled envelope in my hand, disbelief etching every line of my face. My niece, Emma, had innocently handed it to me, saying it was from Grandma. Why the secrecy? I glanced at the clock. It was almost time for Emma to leave. "Thanks, sweetie," I said, tucking the envelope into my pocket as I heard my sister's car pull up outside. After a warm goodbye, I closed the door, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. My name is Avery Sullivan. At 35, I had carved out a respectable career in marketing, leading a team in a bustling firm downtown. Life, for the most part, seemed comfortably predictable. That is until Nolan, my husband of 6 years, began acting oddly. Returning to the living room, I settled on the couch, the envelope now burning a hole in my pocket. With a deep breath, I tore it open. The words scrawled across the paper were simple, yet earth-shattering. "Avery, watch Nolan closely. Things aren't as they seem." I frowned. Nolan, my carefree, often irresponsible husband, had his quirks, but what did Mom mean? Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it wasn't a disaster either. Since meeting Nolan at a mutual friend's gallery opening, life had been a whirlwind. His spontaneity was infectious, his disregard for convention charming in its own way. We married within a year, a decision that felt right at the time. But now doubt crept in, fueled by Mom's cryptic warning. The past few months had seen Nolan more secretive, his phone always on silent, his late-night work sessions more frequent. I had attributed it to his job at the tech startup, but Mom's note made me question everything. I decided to confront him. As I stood, a key turned in the lock, and Nolan entered, his face tired but smiling. "Hey, Avery, sorry I'm late. Got caught up at work," he said, shrugging off his coat. I watched him, a storm of emotions brewing inside me. The perfect opportunity to address my growing suspicions had just walked through the door. "Nolan, we need to talk," I began, my voice steady but tinged with an edge. He looked up, surprised. "Sure, what's up?" "It's about us, about your recent behavior." "I'm worried," I said, clutching the now crumpled envelope. Nolan's expression shifted, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place crossing his face. "Avery, His words trailed off as his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, a visible tension settling over him. "I need to take this. We'll talk later, okay?" I nodded, frustration simmering. As he stepped into the other room, I realized the confrontation would have to wait. But then, a sharp pain shot through my chest. Nolan collapsed, clutching his left arm, his face contorted in agony. "Nolan," I rushed to him, my heart pounding. In that moment, all anger and suspicion evaporated, replaced by sheer panic. As I dialed 911, my mind raced. What was happening? Was this related to the secrets he was keeping? The questions swirled, but one thing was clear. Nolan's life hung in the balance, and with it the truth I was desperate to uncover. As the ambulance siren faded into the distance, I sat alone in the quiet room. The envelope lay forgotten on the floor, its message a haunting echo of the chaos that had just unfolded. The hospital's sterile walls did nothing to ease the turmoil churning inside me. Nolan lay in his bed, a maze of tubes and monitors surrounding him. The doctor had said it was a mild heart attack, but he was stable. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived, overshadowed by the growing web of suspicion. As Nolan slept, I couldn't help but replay our last conversation. The phone call, his sudden collapse, it felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. Over the next few days, I decided to dig deeper. Nolan's phone, usually guarded like a treasure, lay unattended on the nightstand. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the password screen glaring at me. I tried his birthday, nothing. Then on a hunch I typed in our anniversary date. It clicked open. The texts were damning. Flirtatious exchanges, plans to meet, all with someone named Clara. My heart pounded as I scrolled through message after message, each word a dagger. I confronted Nolan the next day. His initial shock quickly turned to defensiveness. "Avery, it's not what you think," he stammered, trying to sit up. "Not what I think. Nolan, you're having an affair." My voice cracked, anger and hurt warring within me. He sighed, his eyes avoiding mine. "It was a mistake, Avery. I never meant to hurt you." "Mistake? How long has this been going on?" I demanded, fighting back tears. "A few months," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I stood there, reeling from his confession. The lies, the deceit, it was overwhelming. I needed air, space to think. Without another word, I left the room, Nolan's pleas fading behind me. The next few days were a blur. The evidence was undeniable, but I struggled with what to do. Our marriage, once a source of joy, now felt like a sham. As I sat in the hospital cafeteria, my phone buzzed. It was my sister. "How's Nolan?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. "He's stable," I replied, my voice hollow. "And you? You sound off." I hesitated, then the words tumbled out. "He's been having an affair, Jess, with someone named Clara." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Oh, Avery, I'm so sorry." I nodded, even though she couldn't see. "I don't know what to do. I feel so betrayed." "Avery, listen to me," Jess said firmly. "You need to think about yourself now. Nolan made his choice. It's time you made yours." Her words struck a chord. Jess was right. Nolan had made his choice, and now it was my turn. As I hung up, a new resolve settled within me. Nolan's deceit had shattered our marriage, but I wouldn't let it break me. It was time for retribution, time to make Nolan face the consequences of his actions. I returned to Nolan's room, my steps determined. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Avery, No, Nolan. It's my turn to speak. Your affair, your lies, it's over. We're over." His face crumpled, but I didn't waver. This was just the beginning. Nolan would soon learn the true cost of his betrayal. In the days following my declaration, Nolan's attempts at reconciliation became more desperate, but the trust was shattered. His words fell on deaf ears. I was determined to unearth the extent of his deception. I began by delving into our finances. Nolan had always been vague about money, but now every statement, every transaction held potential clues. The deeper I dug, the more alarming the revelations. Secret credit cards, unpaid bills, and a trail of expenses that led straight to Clara. Nolan's hospital stay extended due to complications, giving me more time to investigate. Clara, it turned out, was the daughter of a local pharmacist known in our community. The brazenness of it all left me reeling. They hadn't just crossed paths, they had woven a web of lies right under my nose. One evening, as I sifted through bank statements, my phone rang. It was Nolan's doctor, asking me to come to the hospital immediately. "It's urgent," he said, his tone grave. Rushing to the hospital, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited. Nolan was conscious, looking more haggard than ever. But it was the doctor's words that echoed in my ears. "Mrs. Sullivan, your husband's condition is more serious than we thought. He's had a secondary complication, which has resulted in partial paralysis." Paralysis. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I stared at Nolan, searching for any sign of deceit. But his eyes, usually so full of cunning, now reflected fear and uncertainty. Nolan reached out with his functioning hand, his voice barely a whisper. "Avery, please." "I need you." I recoiled, the magnitude of his betrayal still fresh. "Need me? Like you needed Clara?" He flinched, the guilt written all over his face. "Avery, I made a mistake, but I'm paying for it, can't you see?" His plea was pathetic, a stark contrast to the confident, carefree man I had married. But there was no sympathy in me, only a burning desire for justice. "You made your bed, Nolan. Now lie in it," I said, my voice cold. As I turned to leave, Nolan's doctor pulled me aside. "Mrs. Sullivan, I understand this is difficult, but your husband requires care now more than ever." His words were a reminder of the complexity of my situation. Nolan, despite his faults, was now vulnerable, dependent. It was a cruel twist of fate, one that left me torn between my desire for revenge and a sense of duty. The drive home was a blur. My mind wrestled with the doctor's words and Nolan's newfound helplessness. It was a perverse form of karma, but it also opened a door. A door to a revenge that was subtle, yet powerful. I arrived home to an empty, silent house. The walls seemed to echo with the remnants of a life that once was. But within that silence, a plan began to form. Nolan's betrayal had cost him more than he realized. Now, it was time for him to understand the true price of his actions. A price that I would dictate, in a game where I held all the cards. The sterile smell of the hospital mingled with the scent of betrayal as I walked through its corridors. Nolan's condition had stabilized, but the paralysis remained. He looked up as I entered, a mix of hope and fear in his eyes. "Avery, I didn't expect you to come back," he murmured, his voice tinged with surprise. "I'm not here for pleasantries, Nolan. I'm here to settle things," I replied, my tone icy. Nolan attempted a weak smile, but it faltered. "I know I've messed up, but this paralysis, it's karma, isn't it?" "Karma? No, Nolan. This is just the beginning," I said, leaning in. "You've played your games, now it's my turn." His eyes widened, the realization of my intentions dawning on him. Avery, what are you planning? That's for me to know, but trust me, you'll pay for every lie, every deceit. I could see the fear creeping into his eyes, a fear that gave me a sense of power, a taste of revenge. As I turned to leave, a woman entered the room. Clara. She looked at me, her eyes betraying a flicker of guilt. Clara, this is my wife, Avery. Nolan introduced us, his voice strained. We've met, I said, my gaze fixed on Clara. I know all about your little affair. Clara's face flushed, a mix of embarrassment and defiance. Nolan and we didn't mean to hurt you. Hurt me? Oh, you've done much more than that, and now you'll both see the consequences, I said, my voice steely. Nolan interjected. Avery, please, let's talk about this. There's nothing left to talk about, I replied. You've made your bed, and now you'll lie in it, both of you. With that, I left them in the room, their stunned silence a satisfying conclusion to the encounter. The game had changed. Nolan and Clara were no longer the players. They were the pawns. As I walked away, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my sister Jess. Avery, we need to talk. I've found out something about Nolan. Curiosity piqued. I quickened my pace. Jess had always been resourceful, and if she had uncovered something new, it could be another piece in my revenge plan. We met at a nearby cafe, the bustle around us a stark contrast to the tension between us. What did you find out? I asked, eager yet apprehensive. Jess leaned in, her voice low. Nolan's accident wasn't just a coincidence. He was with Clara when it happened. The revelation hit me like a wave. The accident, the paralysis, it was all intertwined with his affair. And there's more, Jess continued. I've heard rumors that Nolan was planning to leave you, start a new life with Clara. Anger and betrayal churned within me, fueling my resolve. Nolan's deception ran deeper than I imagined. Thank you, Jess, I said, my mind racing with possibilities. This changes everything. As I left the cafe, a plan formed in my mind. Nolan and Clara thought they could rewrite the narrative, but I was the author of this story, and I would ensure it had a fitting end. Back home, the silence was deafening. It gave me space to think, to plan. Nolan's betrayal, now interwoven with his paralysis, had complicated things, but it also gave me an unexpected edge. The next day, I visited Nolan again. This time, my approach was different, more calculated. Nolan, I've been thinking, I started, feigning a tone of reconciliation. Maybe we can work things out, start afresh. He looked at me, hope flickering in his eyes. Really, Avery? I would love that. But first, I need honesty, total honesty, I said firmly. Nolan nodded eagerly. Anything, Avery, I swear. I leaned in closer. Tell me about the accident, the whole truth. He hesitated, then began. Clara and I were driving back from a weekend away. I lost control of the car. That's how the accident happened. I kept my expression neutral, hiding the storm inside. And Clara? She was fine. Just some minor bruises, he replied, his voice faltering. I stood up, my resolve hardening. Thank you for being honest, Nolan. As I left the room, Nolan's eyes followed me, filled with a mix of relief and confusion. Back home, I started putting my plan into action. I hired a private investigator, tasking him with digging deeper into Nolan's affair and the accident. The truth was my weapon, and I intended to wield it with precision. A few days later, the investigator provided his report. It was worse than I thought. Not only had Nolan been with Clara during the accident, but he had also been planning to leave me, to start anew with her. Fueled by this newfound information, I visited Nolan again, this time with a purpose. Nolan, I know about your plans with Clara, I said, watching him closely. His face paled. Avery, it's not like that. Don't insult my intelligence, I snapped. You were planning to abandon me, to start a life with her. Nolan's eyes darted around the room, a trapped animal looking for escape. Avery, please let me explain. No more lies, Nolan. I've heard enough, I said, cutting him off. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to divorce, and you're going to agree to my terms. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He knew he was cornered. As for Clara, she'll learn the truth. All of it. Your deceit, your plans, everything. Nolan's face crumpled. You wouldn't. Watch me, I said, my voice cold as ice. I left him there, his pleas echoing behind me. The tables had turned. Nolan, once the manipulator, was now at my mercy, and I had no intention of letting him off easy. The game of deception he had played was over. Now it was time for retribution, and I was ready to claim my victory. The day I filed for divorce felt like stepping into a new era. Armed with the truth and a resolve of steel, I walked into Nolan's hospital room with the divorce papers. "Nolan, these are the divorce papers," I announced, placing them on the bedside table. He looked at them, his face a mask of disbelief. "You're serious about this?" "Deadly serious," I replied. "You've played me for a fool long enough." Nolan's eyes searched mine, looking for a hint of mercy. "Avery, can't we talk about this? Maybe go to counseling, try to—" "No, Nolan, there's nothing left to salvage," I cut him off. "You've made your choices, and now you live with them." He sighed, a defeated man. "What do you want, Avery?" "Everything," I said bluntly. "The house, the savings, and no alimony for you. And Clara will know everything." His face crumbled. "You'll ruin me." "You did that yourself," I replied coldly. Nolan signed the papers, his hand trembling. It was a victory, but a hollow one. I had wanted justice, but standing there, watching the broken man before me, I felt no joy, only a deep sense of loss. As I turned to leave, Clara entered the room. Her eyes widened at the sight of the signed papers. "What's this?" she asked, confusion etching her features. "Our divorce," I said, meeting her gaze. "Nolan and I are done. He's all yours now." Clara looked from me to Nolan, her expression a mix of shock and realization. "You're leaving Avery for me?" Nolan remained silent, his eyes on the floor. "Clara, you were the other woman, but now you're the only woman." "Congratulations," I said, the words laced with bitterness. I walked out, leaving them to their new reality. It was a reality they had chosen, built on lies and deceit. They deserved each other. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. The divorce was quick, Nolan too defeated to fight. The house, the savings, they were all mine. But they felt empty, remnants of a life I no longer wanted. I started over, in a new apartment, with a new job. It was hard, starting from scratch, but it was honest, and it was mine. Through mutual friends, I heard about Nolan and Clara. Their relationship, built on the ruins of my marriage, was rocky, fraught with mistrust and guilt. They were a constant reminder to each other of how they had hurt me, and it ate away at them. As for me, I found peace in my solitude. I had loved Nolan, but that love had been based on a lie. Now I was learning to love myself, to find happiness in my independence. I realized that revenge hadn't brought me joy, but it had brought me clarity. I was stronger now, wiser, and ready to face whatever life threw at me. Nolan and Clara had each other, but I had something far more valuable, my freedom and my dignity. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Months had passed since the divorce, and life had settled into a new rhythm. The wounds were healing, slowly but surely. I had learned to embrace the quiet, finding solace in the small joys of everyday life. One crisp autumn evening, as I sipped tea on my balcony, my phone rang. It was Jess. "Avery, have you heard about Nolan?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "No, what happened?" I replied, a flicker of curiosity igniting within me. "He's left town, moved away with Clara. Apparently, they're trying to start over somewhere new," Jess explained. I paused, processing the news. Nolan and Clara leaving town was the final chapter in our shared story. A story that had ended not with dramatic confrontations, but with quiet departures. "Do you feel okay about it?" Jess asked gently. I smiled, more to myself than to her. "I'm okay, Jess. More than okay. I've moved on." We chatted for a while longer before hanging up. I sat there, looking out at the city lights, reflecting on the journey I had been through. Nolan's betrayal had shattered my world, but it had also rebuilt me. Stronger, more resilient. I had sought revenge, but in the process, I had found something far more valuable, my sense of self. I realized that true victory wasn't in seeing Nolan and Clara's downfall. It was in my rise from the ashes of our broken marriage. It was in the life I had built for myself, one that was authentically mine. The next morning I walked to work, the city bustling around me. I felt a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. My past with Nolan was just that, the past, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. As I reached my office, my colleague, Mark, greeted me with a warm smile. "Morning, Avery. You look good today." "Thanks, Mark. It's a new day," I replied, returning his smile. And it truly was. A new day, a new chapter, one where I was the author writing my own story, one filled with hope, strength, and endless possibilities.